Hi, ArcfieldWeather.com meteorologist Paul Dorian here on Monday, April 25th. We are rapidly closing in on the month of May, and it is time once again to take a look at some of the factors that may have an impact on the tropical season in the Atlantic Basin, as well as an impact on the summer conditions across the nation. We are indeed headed for another La Nina type of tropical season. La Nina, which represents colder than normal sea surface temperatures in the equatorial part of the Pacific Ocean, actually kicked into gear in the early part of 2020. It indeed had an impact on the tropical season in 2020 as well as 2021, and it looks like it'll have an impact on the 2022 tropical season. Many signs, many computer forecast models suggest La Nina will continue for a third season here. Back to back La Nina is certainly unusual, but indeed it looks like La Nina conditions will continue well into the upcoming tropical season, and that again is a major factor we'll look at over the next several minutes. We'll look at other parts of the sea surface temperature pattern as well, specifically across the Atlantic Ocean. Let's start off with here with a kind of a bottom line up front, the executive summary, and I do believe we'll have above normal activity this summer in the Atlantic Basin. That means more named storms compared to normal, more hurricanes, and more major hurricanes compared to the averages for the Atlantic Basin. Perhaps not quite as active as the last couple of years, but again, above normal for the tropical season in the Atlantic Basin. And again, a main factor right here, continuation of La Nina. Again, it began in the beginning of 2020, springtime 2020, and continued right through the winter, this last winter, and looks like it'll continue well into the upcoming summer season, quite likely into the fall as well. A back-to-back La Nina. We'll also look at the Atlantic Ocean. It's kind of mixed signals right now coming from the Atlantic Ocean in terms of the sea surface temperature pattern. We have an area of colder than normal water across the west, just off the west coast of Africa, and yet if you go to the western Atlantic, Gulf of Mexico, Caribbean Sea, there's some warmer than normal conditions. So we'll talk a lot about that over the next several minutes. And as a result of what I expect to see in terms of sea surface temperature pattern around the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean, I have chosen 7 analog years, and I look back at what kind of weather conditions we had across the nation and across the Atlantic Basin during those analog years to give kind of a clue as to what we can expect this upcoming tropical season. Well, let's take a look at the sea surface temperature anomaly pattern as it exists right now going into the end of the month of April. And again, the hurricane season officially begins on June 1st, but certainly we can have activity as early as May. Certainly we've had activity as early as May in recent years, but certainly what jumps out at you right off the bat, this area of colder than normal water right across the equatorial part of the Pacific Ocean. This is the equator right here along that parallel line. This is South America, and just off the west coast of South America, a lot of blue showing up. That's colder than normal conditions. This is your La Nina right here, and it has been really in place, maybe not 100% of the time, but much of the time over the past couple of years, beginning again during the springtime of 2020. When you have La Nina conditions in the equatorial part of the Pacific Ocean, that is a favorable pattern for activity in the Atlantic Basin. Basically, it produces lower than normal wind shear in the Atlantic Basin, the tropical part of the Atlantic Ocean, and that in turn is favorable for the intensification and the formation of tropical activity. There are a couple of areas of interest across the Atlantic Ocean itself, however. One is, look at all this blue right here off the west coast of Africa. This is colder than normal conditions right here in the eastern Atlantic. This is a kind of a negative factor for formation and intensification of tropical activity. But you go across the western Atlantic, the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean Sea, and there's a lot of above normal conditions. This is a favorable pattern right here for tropical activity. So kind of mixed signals coming from the Atlantic, but all in all, a dominating factor here is La Nina, and that is a favorable factor for activity in the Atlantic Basin. Again, I believe above normal activity is coming this particular summer. Now, when you have La Nina in the Pacific Ocean, that tends to be a suppressing, a limiting factor in the Pacific Ocean. And while we've had very active years the last couple of years in the Atlantic Basin, Pacific Ocean, especially the far western Pacific Ocean, has been rather quiet the last couple of years with La Nina, and I believe that'll be the case again this particular summer season. Well, one of the reasons why I believe La Nina will continue for the next several months is a vast majority of computer forecast models, both what we call dynamical models and statistical models, tend to forecast a continuation of La Nina, not only into the summer season, but perhaps into the fall as well. Again, this is somewhat unusual to have. It's unusual to have back-to-back La Nina years, but it's very unusual to have what we're going to experience this year, a third year, a back-to-back La Nina. Here we are now beginning in the springtime right here, and anything below this line right here, this is the neutral line here, anything below that is La Nina, and anything above that represents El Nino, or warmer than normal conditions, and none of that. There are a couple of outlier models that do suggest El Nino, but for the most part, the vast majority of computer forecast models believe La Nina will continue. And we can see here, going along, some of these averages for the dynamical models, some of the averages for the statistical models just continue to have below the neutral line, maybe a half a degree to as much as a degree below the normal in the equatorial part of the Pacific Ocean. And we're looking at the summer season. For example, these are rolling 3-month averages. This happens to be for August, September, October. And again, the vast majority of these right in the heart of the tropical season, La Nina, below normal temperatures. And again, that favors more than normal activity, higher than normal activity in the Atlantic, in the tropical Atlantic, largely because it usually results in less wind shear in the tropical Atlantic, and that in turn is a favorable sign, a favorable pattern for tropical activity. With El Nino, you tend to have increased winds, increased wind shear in the tropical Atlantic, and believe it or not, El Nino with warmer than normal water in the Pacific Ocean tends to suppress activity in the Atlantic basin. But very high confidence that La Nina will continue for yet a third season, and indeed it'll have an impact, a favorable impact on tropical activity in the Atlantic Basin. By the way, the Atlantic Basin includes the Atlantic Ocean, Gulf of Mexico, and the Caribbean Sea. Well, I mentioned analog years, and one of the ways to choose some analog years is to certainly start off with a forecast of what you expect the sea surface temperatures to be like during the summer, during the fall, during the heart of the tropical season. And this is a forecast map from a compilation of models across North America, including NOAA's models, Canadian model from the Canadian Met Center. And again, it's a compilation of North American models, and it's a forecast map of sea surface temperature anomalies for the heart of the tropical season, August, September, October. And all of these models combine to continue La Nina conditions out across a large portion of the central Pacific Ocean. Again, the equator right in this region, right here, going all the way across that parallel line, and below normal temperatures throughout much of the equatorial part of the Pacific Ocean. Again, this is a forecast map, but based on this particular forecast map, and I certainly agree with this forecast map, which is shown from on tropicaltidbits.com. Also, notice some colder than normal conditions right off the west coast of Africa, and then warmer than normal conditions across the western part of the Atlantic Ocean. So these are the three factors that exist right now across the globe, and it looks like for the most part it'll continue into the summer, into the fall season, with La Nina in the tropical Pacific Ocean, and kind of mixed signals coming in the Atlantic Ocean. But based on these sea surface temperature anomalies, what's forecasted for later this summer, I ended up with 7 analog years, and we'll talk about what kind of weather conditions we had across the U.S. with those 7 analog years over the next couple of minutes here. And here we go. This is the temperature pattern from those 7 analog years. By the way, the 7 analog years are listed right here: 2011, 1970, 1975, 2010, 13, 20, and 21. Those last 2 years we had La Nina conditions, and continues this year, so those certainly are included in my list of analog years. And this is the temperature pattern when you combine all of these 7 analog years. And what jumps out at you right off the bat is the plains. What went on in the plains is quite a hot summer indeed. This is the temperature anomaly pattern for June, July, and August during those 7 analog years. This is indeed something that I'm kind of concerned about. It looks like could very well be a hot and dry summer across the central and northern plains, and that certainly could have a negative impact on some crop production here, so it's something we'll have to monitor. But indeed, the analog years, and I certainly tend to support the idea of a hot and dry summer across much of the central and northern plains, which is in some ways ironic, because right now, for the first few months of this year, 2022, from January to the latter part of April, it's been colder than normal. In fact, the coldest spot relative to normal so far year to date has been the northern plains. But it looks like they'll probably have a flip in the pattern and end up becoming much warmer than normal, and a hot, dry summer is possible across the central and northern plains. It looks like above normal conditions, not extreme though, but above normal conditions across the mid-Atlantic and northeastern part of the nation, near normal across the southeast, and across much of the western U.S. near normal as well. Well, in terms of precipitation anomalies, again, from those 7 analog years, it looks like much of the eastern third of the nation actually in those years experienced above normal precipitation, wetter than normal conditions, and I believe that will be the case again this particular summer season. We're looking at June, July, and August. It's been quite a wet spring across much of the Mid-Atlantic region, for example, the northeast U.S., and again, I think it'll end up being near normal to above normal in terms of rainfall amounts going forward through the summer season. And that, by the way, is a limiting factor for any kind of extreme heat in the Mid-Atlantic, in the northeast U.S. Anytime you have soil conditions that are moist, that is an inhibiting factor. Your real hot, dry summers in the Mid-Atlantic, northeast, really anywhere across the nation, occur with drought conditions. Fortunately, that is a possibility here across much of the central plains. Again, these analog years had drier than normal conditions. You combine that with the hotter than normal weather expected across the central and northern plains, you can have kind of a hot, dry with drought type conditions in much of the summer season. Again, specifically for the central and northern plains, but even drier than normal all the way down into Texas and Florida as well. Could very well have some drier than normal weather conditions this June, July, and August. Well, let's wrap up now by going to the bottom of this particular posting, which is, by the way, right now out there on the home page of arcfieldweather.com. If you want to go back and look at all of these maps, just go to the home page right now for these 2022 tropical outlook. There are a couple of maps we did not discuss in this video, so you'll see those as well. Again, based on the continuation of La Nina conditions, I expect more than normal activity in the Atlantic Basin for the 3rd straight year, but perhaps not quite as active as the last couple of years. That generally suggests to me we'll have maybe as many as 17 or 18 named tropical storms, as many as 7 or 8 hurricanes, and maybe 3 or 4 of those could become what we call major hurricanes. Certainly, the East Coast is vulnerable to a direct hurricane hit. Those analog years, there are certainly some direct hurricane hits along the eastern seaboard, so it's something we'll watch out for. In terms of actual weather conditions. Watch out, the central and northern plains could very well turn out to be a hot and dry summer that could have a negative impact on crop production, probably warmer than normal conditions in the mid-Atlantic region, the northeast U.S., but wetter than normal as well, and that will kind of inhibit the chances of any kind of extreme heat. And out in the western U.S., generally near normal conditions in terms of temperature and precipitation. So again, La Nina is the overriding factor that we've been monitoring not only this spring but for the last couple of years, and it looks like it will continue across the tropical Pacific Ocean right through the upcoming tropical season. That's it for now. For ArcfieldWeather.com, I'm meteorologist Paul Dorian.